All right, so what are successful people doing differently than average people, right? It's my birthday. I wanted to share something with you guys about things that I learned about successful people after studying mentors, people who have really reached the top, the pinnacle of success, and distill some of that information down into some bite-sized chunks for you guys. So I've got a list of 5 things here. Obviously, this isn't encompassing of everything that these successful people do differently, but I think these are 5 really important ones that really hit home that I want to share with you guys. So the first one here is get specific, right? People who are really successful are really specific about what it is they want and exactly what that looks like. And part of the specificity factor is that when you tie a lot of clarity to what your outcome is, it's really hard to miss, right? I think a lot of us go wrong when we get very broad and ambiguous about what it exactly is that we want, right? A lot of us, when we take out goals, say, hey, I want to be rich, I want to have a business, I want to have a great relationship, I want to do all these different things, but in reality, those are really broad. And what happens when things are broad is we lose motivation because we don't know exactly what it is we're doing, right? Let's say you want to write a book. You sit down at the table and you get to go writing and none of the ideas are flowing. You have no idea what you want to do, right? The idea behind getting specific is that if you sit down at the table and say, I'm going to write 3 sentences about my day today, right? And that suddenly transforms into something very manageable that you can do. It's very clear and defined. And what successful people do is they get very specific about what it is they want. They can visualize it, they can see it, and it makes getting it that much easier, okay? Number 2. Take action, right? And what I wrote here that you can't see is go from thinking to doing to being, right? Knowledge is great, and so many of us have a lot of knowledge, but knowledge is just potential power. What successful people realize is that in order to really do anything in life, you have to take action, right? Whether it's the right action or the wrong action, what happens when you take action is you learn quickly and you're able to redirect and keep moving forward. But if you just have all this latent potential that you never end up using, you end up being, a great idea that never actually actualizes, right? You end up going from thinking, but never actually doing it. Unless you do, you're going to be passed up by people who end up acting on their ideas, their thoughts, their beliefs, and they end up creating something instead of just thinking about it, right? And it's so important that we take that step. It's one of the hardest things to do, right? Because along with taking action comes a lot of emotions that end up holding us back, right? The feeling of fear of failure, judgment, other people's opinions, but that taking action is so hard. And what happens with action is it's like a muscle. The more you take action, the easier it is to do. And what successful people realize is that action comes first and then aiming, right? So as long as you get started, you can change course on your path. And I think that's such a valuable and important lesson. Number 3, delayed gratification, right? This one's huge, and this is something I've been learning recently. What successful people are really good at is putting off that endorphin, that quick fix, that quick hit emotion for the long term, right? Instead of doing what's easy now, they put that off to do and reap what is great for a long period of time, okay? I think this is so applicable when we think about food or we think about finances, right? What they say, instead of eating the donut now, is I'd rather be able to have as many donuts as I want in the future, right? Or when it comes to finances, I'd rather, not spend that $5 now and have $2,500 in a year. I'd rather I'd rather work out now and suffer that pain now and have an extraordinary longevity of life for years to come, right? It's that minimizing of what you accept now as gratifying and putting that off for the long term in the hopes that you're going to reap the reward 10x, right? So this is extremely difficult to do in the morning, but the better you can be at delayed gratification, right? Putting things off that feel good now for the long haul, you end up amplifying whatever it is you would get in the moment and get 10x that in the future. So a great lesson and something I think you can start implementing right away. Number 4, a growth versus a fixed mindset, right? And the idea behind a growth mindset is that things like your intelligence, your talent, these are all things that you can manufacture and grow over time. You're not born with a certain set of skills and skill sets, but what it is that you're not already there, you're becoming, right? Whatever it is, you might not be there, but you can become that. Whereas the fixed mindset says, I'm born with X, Y, and Z capabilities, and if I can't do it now, I'll never be able to do it. this idea that, instead of focus on, being a great athlete or being, somebody who's really smart, focus on, I'm not there, but I'm becoming. I'm getting there. I'm focusing on being a learner, being a doer. These things that aren't outcome oriented, but they're process oriented, right? And the more we can instill a growth mindset, the more resilient we can be to life, and the more we realize that life is not about a finite set of expectations, but an infinite set of possibilities depending on how malleable your brain can be, right? And this is so powerful because if you thought that you came into this world with a fixed set of capabilities, intelligence, emotions, you would stop once you come up against a wall. And what happens with growth mindset people, and I think this is encompassing of a lot of entrepreneurs, is that if you have a growth mindset, when you come up against an obstacle, instead of letting that dictate you dictate the outcome. You can be more resilient to whatever walls or obstacles come across your way, and this is huge in your life when you're trying to create and build something. And the last thing here is having a macro outlook, right? Having an outlook on the long term instead of the short term. I think it's so important that people tend to overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in a decade, right? The potential for the long term is so massive. People tend to give up in the short term, right? People tend to give up on their businesses 6, 9, 12 months into the game when they don't realize that an investment in yourself is a decade or more experience, right? The 10,000 hour rule. You need to have a macro outlook. You need to have macro patience, but you need to take as much action you can in the micro to get to that outcome, right? And people tend to lack patience. People tend to get upset when they don't see immediate results, right? Back to delayed gratification. If they're not seeing the immediate result, they think it's not worth doing, but that's not the case. Anything worth having is worth waiting for. And in the macro outlook, you can have whatever you want to have on a long enough scale, but you need to be patient enough and put in the work long enough to be able to do that, right? I remember somebody was interviewing Lewis Howes, and if you know Lewis Howes, he's a great podcaster, and he has the School of Greatness podcast. And somebody said, Lewis, why do so many people fail when they try and do a podcast? And he said, well, you're not willing to invest long enough to see the results. He said, I knew I was going to have to wait 5 years before anybody really started listening to my podcast. And he was right. People aren't willing to have the patience to build whatever type of successful life, career, relationship they want to have, and they're not willing to put in the work in the short term. So have a macro outlook on life to really reap the rewards. The 5 things here, again, get really specific on what you want. Take massive action, delay your gratification for the long term, have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and lastly, have a macro outlook on life to get what it is you want. I hope these 5 things help, and I hope there's things that you can pull from this immediately to get what you want in life. I'll talk to you guys soon.